class. Today we're going to be covering a few different tools. So we'll be reviewing the pencil tool. We'll be getting into the gradient tool as well as using the blender tool. In my screen you can kind of see some of these products here, a pathway, the word and it has all of these gradients kind of like played out across it. This is actually a result of using the blender tool. This version of and is using the blender tool as well, and you can see the little line that's underneath the word and here is actually the setup to create the stroke that informs this word using the blender tool. Right up here above the artboard you can also see here's the word and that I drew using the pencil tool. When you're using the pencil tool, if you want to get more smooth line work, you can actually double click on it, which will bring open this window, and then if you click and drag this little ball to the right, you'll get more smoothness to your line. If you go more to the left, it's going to follow more of how you actually move the mouse or a stylus if you're using that. So you can hit OK. In this case you can actually see like where I was writing the word and so you click and drag, kind of like get into a little bit of your cursive mentality, and you'll see the nice thing about smoothing out with the pen tool is that instead of having like super jagged lines, it kind of puts on a filter that then smooths your lines out quite a bit more. So I wanted to show that for you in case you wanted to get into some hand lettering while actually in Illustrator, just so you have much more smooth and pleasing lines to look at. So I'm going to delete this. So we've got our word. In this case, I'll probably end up sending you this file with the word and in it so you can actually apply the blender tool to it. And so what we need to do is, like, once we actually have our path, we then need to find some color or some shapes to actually put up across that path. So let's go ahead and get into the blender tool just so we understand that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an ellipse. I'm going to hold Shift and Alt. And I'll get a circle. And then I can actually have this circle filled out. With this circle, I now need to make a destination for where the blend will go to. And so for any blend to work, you actually have to get some kind of change to create a transition. So in the simplest terms, with these two shapes, I can now select my blender tool. So clicking on it once, it goes from one shape, and then I click on the next shape, which is the destination. And by doing that, it creates all of these variations between along a pathway. So it draws a straight line between the two, and it creates all of these different shades or tints or tones between those two different colors. Something you can also do if you double click on the blender tool, so just double click on it, it'll bring open a window, and you can also do specified steps. So I could say like I want 4 steps between those two and hit OK. And here it becomes kind of like a clever way to actually get different colors that exist between two specific colors. So if you're looking for specific like color schemes between blue and green, that can be a great way to do it. You can also double click, and if you want to specify distance between, you could also put like, 0.125, which is like 1/8 of an inch. And if I hit OK, now I've got all of these circles 1/8 of an inch apart from each other, as well as an even step in color from that starting location to the finishing location. Now, something that can also be fun to use with the blender tool is you can also apply gradients to it. So just so we can actually see this as well, I'm going to draw another circle. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the gradient tool here. You can see it's hotkey G. And when I click on it, you'll notice it'll also bring open this window over on the right side. You can also see parts of the gradient tool as well here on the right side. So I'm going to click once. This brings open the window. Once I click into this lower section here, which has two different swatches and an even gradient between it, you can see that it actually applies it to my first circle right here. Within the gradient tool, you have a bunch of different options. So you could do your linear gradient, you could do a radial gradient, or you could also do this freeform gradient where you can actually like place a bunch of colors, almost as if they're like in a quadrant within that shape. For this purpose though, I'm just going to do a linear gradient, and I'll leave the even spacing here. So I've got this little slider in the middle which kind of controls how much the colors like run into each other. If it's perfectly in the middle at 50, then it's an even spread between the colors. So I'll hit 50. We can also add more colors, or we can change colors. So by double clicking on the color, you can then see, you can move these RGB sliders around and you can get a different color. You could also take the color picker and pick within those different ranges. And then once you like the color, you can just click out back into the gradient tool. In order to use this in conjunction with the blender tool, what we're going to do is we're going to create at least two different swatches or shapes with color in them. But in this case, probably what I'm going to do is 3, just so you can see how size as well as change in color can make for an interesting solution. So I just did an Alt copy and got one circle out there. I'm going to go Control D to duplicate it. And so now you can see I have, let's zoom in there, I've got 3 different circles here. In order to make this a little bit interesting as well, I'm going to actually scroll or scale up one of these. So I'm just going to hold Alt and Shift and make one a little bit bigger, and then I'll leave this one smaller. So when I use the blender tool, it'll actually go small to big to small. I'm also going to change the angle of my gradient. I'm going to change it to 30 degrees there, and then this one I'll change to 60. That way, like as the circles blend from one to the other, we'll actually get this sense of like light also moving around the circle. So it'll look like as if the yellow side of the circle is getting some movement to it. So if you're shining a yellow flashlight on the right side of that circle, it would slowly then start to rotate up the circle by 30 degrees. So I'm now going to take my blender tool, click on the first circle. Actually, first I'll select it. I'll click on my first circle, then I'll click on the next circle, and then I'll click on the last circle. And so here you can actually see the transitions between the circles is taking place. And so I now have something I could actually apply to a line. This isn't really going to work out that well though, because the transitions there's too much space between them. So I have this selected and I'm going to double click on my blender tool. And what I'm going to change it to is specified distance. And here I just want to get like a really tight space. So I'm just going to go 0.05 and then hit OK. And so basically what happens if we zoom in there, you can kind of see all the tiny separations that are between those two. And I could make it even tighter, but eventually you're going to get to a point where like you might make it so tight that it'll make the computer run really slowly. Okay, so I've got my blended line, and then I've got the stroke that I want to apply it to. So the last thing I can do is click and drag over both, so both are selected. And then I can go up to Object, Then I'll go to blend, and then I can hit replace spine. So what happens when you do that is you'll see your original stroke disappears, and then it gets applied to that pathway that you created with the pencil tool. So again, the neat thing about this approach is that you can take what you might consider a pretty rough like pencil line in the creation of like cursive typography, and then by using the blender tool and some of your gradient tool through the creation of 3 different circles, you can actually make some type that almost appears three-dimensional and kind of pretty interesting looking. Again, the effects might be a bit cliche after a while if this is all the creations that you can create, but it might be, in some cases, it might be a neat typographical solution for a poster or perhaps some banner or something like that. All right, last thing I might do to just make this look cooler, I'm going to make this disappear, and I would probably just put a shape behind here, hit transform, I'll go 8.5, and I'll align this to my artboard, I'll send it to the back. I can do a right click, arrange, send to back. And then probably what I'll do is I'll mess with my gradient and maybe make this a little bit darker just so I get a little bit better separation. Maybe I can even push some more of that yellow out. And then rotate it. There we go. So again, this is a review of the pencil tool and both the introduction of the gradient tool and the blender tool.